I was worried about how I was going to respond to some of these older lyrics,
Yeah.
some of these more definitely Christian language that I wouldn't write with today, wouldn't be compelled to write with today. And I had to go in and sing some of these songs that I'm like, oh, I literally was like, oh, I can't believe I'm saying these words out loud. But at the same time, like, it opened my own generosity to the young woman who wrote them. And it took me back to the place of remembering that when I did write them, I was alone in my room, genuinely writing these as prayers. And to be, like, I had to be graceful to her because when you're doing I use the metaphor that sometimes going back and doing this record was a little bit at moments like going on and putting pants that I tried to wear 25 years ago. I mean, there aren't a lot of us who have wardrobe choices that we can still fit into in our later years that we had when we were kids. Not only like does the style change, but so does our ass. So does our belt line. And so you don't want to look like a fool doing it, and you don't want to be uncomfortable, but you also, I didn't want to be her, but I did understand what she was like because I share her memories. My name is Jennifer Knapp. I'm a former contemporary Christian music artist, but I'm now doing just music in the broader world. I'm a singer-songwriter and have been for over about 30 years now. I'm getting on there. But yeah, my history in the church is, well documented so far as my contemporary Christian music career.
Yeah.
And, like presently I'm participating in a lot of LGBTQ plus affirmation and with a nonprofit organization that I started some 15 years ago called Inside Out Faith. But you did ask me about my earliest church memories, and I tell this anecdote all the time, but it really, to me, has become my narrative of the early church experience.
Okay.
Because it has so many things that I feel like I just kind of learned like right off the bat, or struggled with from my my very formative years. And so that's all to say is like I grew up in Kansas, a relatively small community, and I think if you grow up in some of these smaller towns, particularly in the time frame that I did in the 70s and 80s, and even but still today, I think a lot of people are familiar with like just people, like churches just happening inside of the community, even if you're not like a super zealous evangelical or something like that. And my grandmother was one of those people who, this was part of her social fabric. And this is also something that, she did every Sunday with a great deal of, like, I respect her probably now as I've grown older, but she went every Sunday and she's very quiet in her faith, but I suspect she was very serious because she's every Sunday, she prayed before every family meal. It meant a lot to her, right? To kind of emotionally and spiritually connect. Even though I probably wouldn't have thought later on that she was like a super Christian or anything like, from kind of our modern contemporary evangelical terms. But all that to say is my grandmother I would go spend weekends with my grandmother to give my parents a break. And I was just this total, To Kill a Mockingbird scout, just scab knees, tomboy, digging around in the dirt every other day of the week, living in the country and loving it, covered in mozzie bites and chiggers and everything else. And then, the wild gal comes Sunday, and my grandmother always wanted me to come to church with her. And I didn't particularly mind it, but it created a lot of anxiety for me because she was always putting me in a dress and pantyhose. And this was the only occasion that this ever occurred, right? Like some super special event in the familiar world, and getting girls all gussied up in patent leather shoes and these nylons. And I just remember always just having just this I just didn't know how the things worked, like pantyhose. They were just so weird. And like you're putting your legs in sausage casings or spider webs or something like that. And they were hot and uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden I've got this breeze going down in my nether regions. Like it was just this nightmare. All of a sudden, this one day a week that my grandmother just thought, I think, in fairness to her time, and I never felt like gender squeezed into that necessarily, but more socially, what was acceptable for
Yeah.
a young lady. And so that kind of came along with sitting in this hardwood church pew and not really knowing how the whole thing worked, like just the liturgy and all of the things that were getting passed around, like the plate of money, which there's quarters like laying right
Yeah.
there. How do you not touch them? And then the communion plate going by, and all these really fascinating things on top of my physical discomfort, my social discomfort, and just sitting in a wooden pew and just being ADD and bouncing all over the place, like just being expected to be polite and all of that, kind of getting roped into this weird thing, what I was supposed to be as a woman, like a young lady, and what God favored and all that. And so, I mean, that was just a picture of just this weird thing that I kind of got anchored into my mind, is that church was this place of discomfort and where I wasn't totally celebrated. I
Mm.
don't think when you're a kid, you're thinking, I'm not being celebrated here.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is something that, you get, especially with the concepts of forgiveness and grace and that kind of floating around for a young mind, to get this perspective that God might like me better if I was a little something different. And also, that there's something literally dirt, like as a tomboy, I always had dirt under my fingernails and scabs on my legs. I was literally dirty. Like that made sense to me if I heard that
Yeah.
kind of alliteration. So I think, I think being a kid, and I think a lot of us, our first exposure to church is in that youthful space, not really quite understanding what all these adults are up to. Um, I just, it took me a while to process that and to figure out how to feel comfortable. And, thank God for the 90s, because that meant that I could wear boots and jeans to
Yeah.
church. It actually, I reckon the dress code kind of really radically changed my ability to participate, because I think that alone would have been enough by the time that, I was an adult and starting to make these decisions for myself. If the requirement was for me to wear a dress, it would have probably been a no-go. As
No. Yeah.
trivial as
Yeah.
that seems.
No, it makes total sense. Like I can look back on my own story of like being in church, and yeah, the basket, those baskets for us, baskets of money. I mean, tossed aside, like, oh, where is this going? And not really understanding like any concept of what's happening, except hey, that's real money, like going across, was always fascinating to me as well. Um, yeah, and then going to church and being like, I have fun with the youth, but then whenever I had to go to like big service, it felt uncomfortable. And it was always around like some big event, or like we've had like Tim LaHaye of like the Left Behind books come in, and it was like, oh, the
Oh,
rapture, right?
wow. Were
And then
you
it's
at
like,
it sounds like you were at a relatively big church. Were you like kind of an
yeah,
urban
I
person?
was at I was at a Calvary Chapel down in San Diego,
Oh,
and
wow.
so
Yeah, that's super big.
yeah, so pretty big. And so yeah, having like these experiences of like big churches, like totally different than young church. So I can definitely see how those correlate in your life as well. So my
But even
next,
in a oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
oh
Like,
no,
but
go for
even
it.
in like a weird contrast, like I'm describing like the downtown church of my small
Yeah.
town. And my relatively speaking, for my community, is one of the larger churches that my grandmother went to. But on my other side of my family, like on my mom's side, my other grandparents lived way out in the country, and they went to this old white Methodist church. The church
Mm.
was white. Ironic, not ironically, but like the people inside of it were pretty white too.
Okay.
But it was this white clapboard. It literally looked like a Little House on the Prairie Methodist church, just a small little old church. It's probably over 100 years old, just built of wood. And it's really
Mm.
intimate, maybe only 20 some odd people on any given Sunday morning, when and if I ever went. And also, my other grandmother didn't make me dress like over the top. Like it was okay as long as I was dressed up nice, like clean. But
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily have any dresses in her world, so that wasn't really a requirement, because she didn't want to wear one either. So we just literally went a mile down the road, you know respected the environment and then would go back. And what I loved, that's all to say, is what I loved about that intermittent environment was it was actually comprehensible to me at that point.
Mhm.
There wasn't a lot of adornment or dressing up of the religious experience. The pastor was pretty laid back,
Yeah.
wasn't this over top, like with the big room, right? Like you're talking about at Calvary, one of the challenges is
Yeah.
really, you have to speak into this big space. And so all of a sudden becomes louder. It becomes a lot more energetic and you have a lot of people to almost entertain. Whereas the
Yeah.
Sunday morning community thing really taught me, I think as I look back, I kind of trying to attach myself to what was so compelling. That's where I fell in love, or that's where I was more intrigued about God in that intimate
Mhm.
space because it wasn't intimidating. It didn't at all look like a show,
Yeah.
and like there was just that wasn't a factor to have to kind of contend with. And that's where I remember my curiosity having enough space for me in my mind and my experience to just start asking questions. Even if the pastor said something screwy to my brain, I still had the ability to like lean over to my grandmother somewhat, informally going, I don't understand, what is this all about? Or this is
Yeah.
weird. Or I think in that space, I also got to go to a Sunday school. So it was like 2 or 3 kids and an old lady whose name I keep forgetting,
Mhm.
with flannel
Yeah.
graphs and telling me the story of Moses, not
Mm.
necessarily on an agenda trying to mold me right into a future member of Calvary Chapel. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting what the size dynamic actually does to a lot of our experiences.
Yeah. It is interesting. And you've been in for through your music career, I'm sure you've been in a lot of different size churches and experiences and demographics as well.
Yeah, along that, like, size matters.
Yeah.
The size is a different thing too, but I think, coupled with that and the Calvary Chapel experience of like the mega church experience is definitely like on par with what I was doing, at the height of my Christian music stuff, right? Big
Mhm.
arenas and like the big, lots of plugged in and anticipation and big crowds, right? But
Yeah.
also like, being a singer songwriter and, with a guitar in your back, I'm going all kinds of places and I'm going from, Maine to Southern California, from Florida to Alaska. And one day I'm in a Methodist church, and the next day I'm in a Presbyterian, and the next time I'm in a non-denominational church, and one day I'm in Kansas. All of these different varieties that I had very early in my kind of adult religious experience taught me that that I actually had to be as this person that was seen and acting, in all of these places. It's not that I felt like I had to be neutral, but I had to be open to the experience
Yeah.
and respectful to this experience that I was going into. And some people, and I'm sure this will be familiar to people, there are pockets of communities that see themselves as practicing the right religion. And there are other people who actually understand that this is their family and this is their tradition, but it's not necessarily everyone's tradition. And I had to
Mm.
be able to figure out how to handle the hospitality or inhospitality in each one of those places while being hospitable myself. Like I didn't, there was some places where I'm like, yeah, what I think, what I believe and where I practice or what I prefer to practice in terms of my tradition don't really fit in here. But
Right.
I don't want to just come in here and disrespect the people that are here. Like whether, they're hand raisers or like speaking in tongues, like I'd never had those experiences before I started traveling and touring because I didn't really grow up around those folks. But, I had to figure out a way to actually see the beauty in what they were doing and try and respect that. I think, it got fatiguing for me after a while, and it still persists to be a problem to me when I go to a community that thinks that they're the only one and they have the truth and the right
Yeah.
belief. When the experience I've had, and I count this fortunate, that I've had to see the diversity of the ways that we practice our faith. So the result of that for me personally is to be open
Yeah.
handed with my faith and understand that, even the way that I see something isn't necessarily exclusive or unique, or the most right or perfect thing. But the hospitality involved in faith as well, and the opportunity to see the beauty of all the different ways has been really helpful for me, and also infuriating and troubling to me when I go into some place where somebody's trying to, make me graft in or telling me that I'm wrong after I've just walked in the door. I know firsthand experience what that's like, and I also know that there was something in that experience I didn't want to be an agent of.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. 'Cause I can look back at when I was in um, middle school, high school. I went to go see a Christian rap artist at a church, at a local church, and I just went into this church and I felt like, oh, it's going to be normal. Like, it's going to be a concert or whatever. And it was a service where, again, like they were speaking in tongues before the music act like came on, and it was totally different from what I ever grew up with. And so I can see that as well, of like having this idea, even for me as a spectator of musicians, and seeing you're playing in a lot of churches, I'm sure, going from different flavors and denominations and belief
I
traditions
call
and
them flavors too.
yeah, exactly. Like different flavors of church. That's awesome. And yeah, just having to pretty much be forced into like tasting this flavor like you're a Baskin Robbins. And it
Yeah.
can be uncomfortable, I'm sure. And then some of them it's like, oh, this isn't for me, but I have to be respectful. So how has that played into the transitions that you've done in your career coming out of the contemporary Christian music scene to kind of where you are now? Have those experiences really helped drive your perspective and your view on kind of faith and
Yeah.
spirituality today?
Well, I think my place is uh, I think my place, like personality, I like in my own personality, I think my place somewhere in that is definitely a peacekeeping type of personality. Like I'm very comfortable and have been throughout the course of my life being in this kind of liminal space between, one extreme and the other. I'm kind of
Mm.
like this balance seeking human being. That's just my personality type. But that coupled with and in association to my religious experience and the kinds of experiences that I've had like over the lifetime of this, I noticed like after I came out, for example, I knew a little, like I knew enough that it wasn't going to be uh I knew what like the most conservative response was going to be for me because I knew those people and I knew what the logic was, and I'd seen them respond to other gay people. I'd been set down in the course of my life for that. As Semler,
Mm.
the Christian artist likes to say, invited out for coffee, to have this sit down of how I'm not quite measuring up. Like I'd had those kind of suspicious experiences before, and then I also had this other side, like which I lent more to of just understanding a little different perspective of that. And I grew up with a lot of mainline people. That's really where I leaned over to in terms of what appealed to me as far as tradition and theology. That's all to say is that somewhere in the middle, like in traveling around that experience, I began to find, because you have to, like, in terms of your own hospitality and your own sanity and your own just genuine, if you have it, your genuine want to connect with the people that are new to you, different from you, and the kind of the stranger, even whether we're all strangers to one another at some point when we're new
Yeah.
to each other, right? To go into
Mm.
those environments and have to find something beautiful about that space, even if it gives me a little bit of discomfort because I'm unfamiliar with the culture or the people, I didn't want to write off all the people because at some point in time, there's this connective thing that we said brought us together. We recognize it brought us together. So that's all to say is like after I came out, and part of like the war in particular that has fiercely raged in our history of you can't be gay and Christian. I'm like, I know all these other people who don't have a problem with that at all, and I'm part of that. And also, I've also
Yeah.
known the rest of you, and I wish that we could all just get together and start communicating, right? So I don't mind living in the tension between those two spots. I feel like I don't necessarily have the same. I haven't had the kind of spirit experience that's caused me to be so hostile to those who don't like me. Um, I've also had to work with, strangely, as an artist, as a musician, like there's just that reality. Sometimes you create work
Yeah.
that people don't like. They
Mm.
don't buy everything that you like, and they're critical of the things that mean a lot to you. And you have to get
Yeah.
some way of coping with that. So with those strategies in mind, I think it's created this kind of unique experience that I've been able to have and been willing to have as inside of and speaking into that space of LGBTQ affirmation in the faith process of just
Mm.
understanding, hey, these theologies aren't going to go away, but I know how to, I know how to contend with them. I'm happy to model them or be in the firewall and just stop debating them. But also, like, try and invite my other friends on the other side who've been damaged by that to come a little bit closer to other community and not still necessarily stay pushed away and be willfully, be continue to be marginalized because we're still healing and in trauma. Like, part of the healing of that thing is coming closer to these spaces that are shared and figuring out their coping strategies. There's really no way around trying to figure out what we do with that shared space. There's going to be hostile forces there at some point in time. There's going to be people you agree with and disagree with. So I'm comfortable being in that space. I'm really comfortable bringing a friend along with me. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things, in talking about the contrast of all these different flavors of faith experiences. I'm not sure I would have had that same. I'm not sure I would have been prepared for that coming out, and that kind of role I've chosen to take in this space, and the ability I've had to be able to take that space and bring others along with me, had I not had those other experiences where I've been like inside my mind. I can remember, like, I was in this like deep South Mississippi church. I was at the end of my career, and my level for tolerance was just gone, right?
Mm.
When we're at our, when we're on our last
Yeah.
nerve and we're really hurting and really struggling, we're not actually, our bandwidth to kind of tolerate hurtful things or weird or uncomfortable things isn't at a high, right? And so I'm in this
Yeah.
deep South Southern church, and all of a sudden, before I went out to play, the leadership of the church didn't really, like, kind of basically forcibly waved hands, like mandatorily said, we're going to pray, you have to sit in the middle. And they surrounded me with all these people, started
Mm.
speaking in tongues and laying hands on me, and I just was not in the mood. And it felt
Mm.
like, they didn't have my consent basically to
Yeah.
do that. It was a really horrible moment to do it, and it was their thing, and it didn't feel like, it ignored me. That I was actively being ignored when I said, please, can we not do this right now? I can't. It's just too overwhelming for
Yeah.
me. And I just remembered, but I had to, in some way in my mind, I felt like outwardly I had to do it. And because here I am in this space and I'm expected to do it. I'm being paid to do, to be a musician and smile and be this grateful, Christian artist coming into this room. And
Yeah.
inside my head, I'm going, get your hands off me. I don't want to be in this room anymore, to the point, like, when you so want to leave a place that all you can think of is like this panic inside your head, and
Mm.
and to even want to lash out and punch things. And I know what
Yeah.
that feeling is like, and to have to, like, shove that down deep down inside and going, I shouldn't be shoving this down. Like, I shouldn't be internalizing the anxiety that I have. There should be, in a perfect world, right, other human beings around that would be compassionate to what I was going through, feeling like an alien, forcibly and unconsensually being forced to participate in this environment. That is not a great place for us to be when we're trying to share something that we think is a gift.
Yeah.
If I make a dinner at home and you don't like it, that's fine. I'm not going to force feed it to you.
Mm.
It is
Yeah.
made as a gift, and if you receive it that way, then that's fantastic. But also, it's one of those things that with those experiences is understanding something about the toleration that we have, and the high means that I put on hospitality, for sure, and how we talk and how other people experience our faith. Because for us, it may seem normal, but for somebody else coming in that environment, can be, even as an adult, right, from a child to a full grown
Mm.
adult, can really induce us into a state of panic and be really hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because yeah, if I came over and you made me a dinner and I didn't like it, it would, it's fine for me not to like it. But then if I was like, you know what, I'm gonna Uber Eats or DoorDash some food and I'm gonna bring it, it's gonna be delivered here to your house. You got to stop eating what you cooked, and you have to eat this meal I bought you, because this is what is going to be a tasty, hearty meal. And what you cook, Jennifer, is just it's not gonna fly for either of us. You have to take this as well, and it's just a
Yeah.
very uncomfortable, inconsiderate experience, kind of for both parties.
Yeah, there are, and I appreciate, particularly, I think, as a woman in a female body, and particularly in American culture, and then you add Christian culture on top of that,
Yeah.
there's a lot of expectations that as women, we're generally socialized to be polite. which leads to problems in the zone of consent and how much we talk
Mm.
about our discomfort. It's not to say, there's this I'm aware with this body and this experience that I've had that sometimes, and I was mistaken for a long time, that my willingness to accept hospitality meant that I had to go through experiences like the one I just described without speaking up for myself and saying, hold on a second. Even giving an alternative, I'm really happy to pray, but I don't feel comfortable right now to be in the center. I've since learned that skill, how to say, hey, screw you. I don't like chili for dinner, or
Yeah.
you're doing this wrong. I'm like, I appreciate that you want to do that. I don't feel comfortable doing that. But if you don't mind, here's an alternative or something like that. You don't have to be hostile to
Mm.
something that you don't want to participate in. But it is not something that, I was raised to have a lot of practice with. I mean, it wasn't until I came out and I started to kind of socially experiment a little bit because I didn't really have anything to lose anymore. Like people were already kind of pissed with me.
Yeah.
So, and I was still on the fence with a lot of my religious experience. Like when I first started going back and doing some work in churches, I was still like advocating for the LGBTQ stuff because people were asking me, and I made that decision largely because I was like, I wanted to do that for the people that I knew and I love. They were basically saying, "Can you go do this?" And I would like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to
Mm.
go back into these spaces, right? And so part of like the arrangement that I made when I went back into those spaces, I mean, usually the first thing I do when I visit a new church is I'm hanging out with the leadership of that church, the pastor, whoever it was that asked me or arranged for me to come in. In those early days, I was walking right in the doors like, listen, I'm really glad to be here. I don't want you to be mistaken. But I'm still on the fence as to whether or not I even believe in what you guys are doing anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it. I don't want to shut it down, but like, I don't know. Like, if I'm critical of my religious experience, or it sounds like I'm mad or ambivalent about this, it's because I am. And I want you to know
Yeah.
that. And I know obviously I care a lot about I think a lot about what I say, and I never want to I want to be a good and positive force in that space. So that I didn't want to destroy anyone's faith. I wanted to make an invitation for people to participate. But at the same time, I would
Mm.
just say, I'm not sure in saying the door is open for any of us to decide that way. I want you to know that I am not going to be leading people to your church. I will say that you're here, but I don't know that I will be giving people permission to walk away because I think it's
Right.
necessary. And
Yeah.
it was just a really interesting thing for the first time in my life, going into those spaces and exercising that option to be able to say, listen, I'm not going to be inhospitable, or I'm working and laboring to be appreciative of where you are and who you are. But I also don't, I want you to very firmly understand that I have boundaries and I have my experience that I want to be gracious inside of this space as well. As long as we can mutually agree on that, I need a little bit of space to be the me that I am and have the experience and come into this space. Is that acceptable to you? And being able to literally say that out loud and that's all to say is like what I have found is actually that's been really helpful. It's been really helpful for other human beings, regardless of the circumstance that I'm in, to actually say out loud, listen, before I get mad, before I get short, before I'm freaking out, right? Before we like bottle all this up, if we say the second that we notice this in our bodies and in our minds and not that kind of tension, we say, hold on a second. I'm starting to freak out a little bit. I'm really uncomfortable here. I'm trying to get the lay of the land. Maybe you can help me slow things down, or maybe, being able to articulate that with somebody else. Most other human beings are going to go, oh, you don't prefer this, or this is something that I can help you with. And,
Yeah.
before we like lose our minds and start creating this, you're damaging me, you're hurting me. Um, Sometimes you just need to flat out tell people to stop. Like, no, you don't get to do that, which I did a lot too, like, especially I think, as an LGBTQ person inside of some religious spaces, I would have, super, super excited people to come right up to my face and say, you can't do this anymore. And be like, I will, but you're not invited to this conversation in that manner. Like, you have to treat me this way. These are my expectations
Yeah.
of, of that. And I think learning to articulate that, and I think particularly as a woman, I've had to kind of learn that skill because so much of my time was spent going, "Oh, you have to be nice." And then you
Mhm.
end up being a doormat, and a doormat's not really helpful for our mental health and well-being, and it's not good for our community either.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it has it was it like taking you back to those early moments in church where you're putting the pantyhose on and like you're feeling that uncomfortable as well? Was there
Yeah, I don't know
correlation
if it took
there?
me back, but I think the light bulb, after
Yeah.
35 years or something like that, the light bulb, I think it took coming out and kind of understanding, like, like, for me, like, I was very much an adult, right? Well, yeah, I was,
Mhm.
gosh, how old was I in 2010? I don't know. I can't do the math right now, but, I
That's
was
fine.
definitely in my 30s after I came out. I'd been out in my life and in my family and as a private citizen for a long time. So the public decision wasn't a new thing, but it
Yeah.
was part of the exchange that I made. So, but all of a sudden in that space, it wasn't that it took me back in some kind of memory or, trauma flashback, but all of a sudden the light bulb went out. Like, cause I was like, I knew that I'd been through those kinds of experiences where it essentially, and I don't want to be like, doormat just feels like an easy shorthand,
Yeah.
right? To just saying, we know that we're acquiescing to things and we're going further past our own boundaries. When we know that the line is behind us and we're still smiling and we're still getting along and we're, we're thinking everything's fine, but internally we're like freaking out and we're just creating, there's this trauma going on and we're not talking about it. I knew, and I'd been over that line. I was like, I'm not going to do that again. So, here's the condition that I kind of set for myself is that I'm going to communicate about that. And when I started to do that and practicing, that's when the light bulb goes off. I'm like, oh, I realize that I've been socialized to do this. I realize this is why I've
Mhm.
pissed off so many Christians for not being ladylike over the years. I remember when I would resist some things early on in my career where I'd say, no, I don't really want to do that because I was just naive. I would go, oh, no, I don't really want to pray in public before my show. I just don't feel comfortable, or leading an altar call. It was not a thing that
Yeah.
I particularly wanted to do, nor that I realized as theologically is not something that I actually wanted to participate in either. But at certain points
Mhm.
when in my career, when people expect me to do it because, oh, you're a musician and you're going to lead the altar call. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, don't want to, and don't actually want to get comfortable doing that. And when I said no to that, just kind of going, oh, that's just not my role here, just kind of innocently, naively, people just going, oh, you're a failure as a Christian, like immediately
Mhm.
going,
Yeah.
and that's leveraged, right, against some sense of ourselves. And you want to be, for those of us inside of a faith community, most of us are very serious about wanting to be faithful, I guess, in that. I don't want to say good Christians or favorable in the eyes of
Yeah.
God because I believe that we are, but we want to be understood that way. And it's not that we're necessarily wanting to be liked, but we want to be esteemed and valued and our dignity intact, right? And so when somebody says, oh, well, you suck at being a Christian because you said no, then I had to figure out ways to kind of navigate that. And I realized that result of trying to do the things that I didn't really want to do because somebody said that doing the things that I didn't want to do were the things that good Christians did.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Right. And then I
Yeah.
did those things and I felt catastrophically worse. And I let that build up for 10 years. So that light bulb goes off. And then, like, the whole thing kind of flashes in front of your eyes. And you go, oh, this has been happening to me since pantyhose. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
this, not to me, but this
Yeah.
thing has been happening for a long time. And it took me 30 some odd years to learn that it's okay for me to say, I'm not into that. It's that
Yeah.
easy. It's not that easy, but it is. Like, it is
Mhm.
really about understanding what I did know that made that quote unquote easy was that
Yeah.
I already knew, and I had an acute awareness that if I went past the boundaries and allowed other people to trespass on me, that my mental health and my well-being and my relationship with others was not going to be healthy. So to be able to make that choice for myself was it was a need. It was a basic need that I had to figure out the skills to be able to do. And I'm shocked that it took me that long, but I'm not shocked that it took me that long, given the environment that I was in, the culture that I grew up, both Midwestern and female, and
Yeah.
religious and, all of these other things. It's a lot. But to know that somewhere in there, what my boundaries were, who I was, what made me feel comfortable, what caused me to be fruitful and healthy, made it a heck of a lot easier to say, I know that I can't go there. I know that I will
Yeah.
not be successful for you or anyone else in this community if I am participating in this way. But let me tell you about the gifts that will allow me to be fruitful and how I can be an asset to you and my community. That knowledge of oneself is not easy work. I mean, that takes a long time for us to do. And I'm still, I'm in my 50s now, and I'm still learning new ways to be able to do that. But the more confident we are, I believe, in knowing who we are, makes it a lot easier to know, and with confidence, that we're not just giving people information and telling them what to do. We're actually sharing with them something about ourselves that they will probably, if they're healthy people as well, they will appreciate, they will honor, and now know the way that with confidence that they can call on you to be that asset, to be that gift,
Yeah.
and also in knowing those assets and gifts, honor you and show that they believe that they have they have the respect of your worth and hold your dignity in their hand.
Yeah. That's really powerful and all good. I definitely was tracking. And then to kind of shift topics, but very much still
Sure.
kind of related, you have Kansas coming out in a couple days from
Right.
today,
Kansas
right? On the
25.
17th. Yeah. So my curiosity is because I'm not a musician by any means, but I'm a graphic designer and some sort of creative. And so I can understand how close art is to kind of identity and an outpouring of our soul and creativity. And so, how has it been revisiting an album and revisiting recording in a totally different space and environment, and the ability to kind of control your own narrative now without any pressure of having to be more ladylike or more quote like Christian and
Right.
clean and all these other words, right? And be able to revisit a time and a period in your life that has kind of defined your career as a musician and all those things. And I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but how has that journey been?
Yeah. Well, you actually put the nail on the head that I didn't like of one of the things I realized about halfway through recording the project. It was shaping up, and we were, we were definitely in the, like, neck deep in recording, doing the recording sessions and stuff of this record. And I can't remember if it was me or Steve Hindalong who produced the record with me. We were pretty much just like in lockstep and partnered through doing this project together. But I think it was Steve that was saying something like, wow, this is really great to be able to have the liberty of recording a project that we have no need to prove ourselves on. Like, I'm not a new artist. People already
Right.
know and love the songs. It's kind of a vanity project. It was literally, we were just we were making this record out of sheer joy. No ulterior
Mm.
motive. I don't care how much it sells. It's made
Yeah.
as a gift for other people. We're promoting it because that's what we do, and this is like a gig, but also, like, if
Yeah.
if no one buys this record, like, the people who wanted it funded it. Like, those of us who have collaborated on making this record. So it was really nice to, like, just get that out of the way. All of the ego things, all of the success, failure kind of things that we worry about when we're creating or offering something, that had flown out the window. So that just, it made me realize, like, what a joy. And especially when Steve had mentioned that even opened up this, like, further bloom of joy that I had, just going, I'm not going to worry about any of the little things that I was worried about. Like, I was worried about how I was going to respond to some of these older lyrics,
Yeah.
some of these more definitely Christian language that I wouldn't write with today, wouldn't be compelled to write with today. And I had to go in and sing some of these songs that I'm like, oh, I literally was like, oh, I can't believe I'm saying these words out loud. But at the same time, like, it opened my own generosity to the young woman who wrote them. And it took me back to the place of remembering that when I did write them, I was alone in my room, genuinely writing these as prayers. And to be, like, I had to be graceful to her, because when you're doing, I use the metaphor that sometimes going back and doing this record was a little bit at moments, like going on and putting pants that I tried to wear 25 years ago. I mean, there aren't a
Mm.
lot of us who have wardrobe choices that we can still fit into in our later years that we had when we were kids. Not only like does the style change, but so does our ass. You know, so does our belt line, and so you don't want to look like a fool doing it, and you don't want to be uncomfortable, but you also, you know, I didn't want to be her, but I did understand what she was like because I share her memories. I sound like I'm wacko talking in the third person,
Yeah.
but that all to say is like I appreciated even somewhat a little bit with that perspective of going, oh, I don't have to prove anything. I'm an old lady. I'm going to go in here and, you know, wear what I want, which is a
Mhm.
great love a great joy that I experienced in the now of going, you know, I've got wisdom, I've got experience that I can give and add to these songs today. But also going, oh, I really had empathy for her experience back in that space. And I also had a lot of grace for knowing that she never knew that this was where this was going to lead. She never knew that she was going to be in the studio and have to be working on trying to navigate what
Yeah.
you wrote basically in a private journal is now having to be aired out to the rest of the world. And you're trying to make a career for yourself and use these same journal writings to make a hit song on the radio. It changes the way that you do your art. And I don't know. I argue maybe that's not art, it's something
Yeah.
else, but it was. And I think that speaks to like the longevity and the joy that I have about this record is, you know, I think it was born in an innocent place, and or like not an innocent place, it was born of an authentic place. It's genuinely somebody who wasn't writing with an ulterior motive for other people, but was genuinely it's a witness to the experience that I was having at that time in my early Christianity, in my young adulthood. And I don't regret that one single bit. And I think we can all relate to that. And that's kind of the gift I wanted to give back, going, no matter how nutty or how much Kool-Aid we felt like we might have drunk during our evangelical experiences, you know, I didn't want to disparage the fact that I didn't want to disparage my faith. I wanted to be able to be comfortable. Like in the long term, you know, in my hurt and in my anguish about some of the things that I've struggled with inside my faith community, I have been angry. I have said hurtful things. I've been anti, you know, like wanting to push and
Mhm.
throw the baby out with the bathwater. But at the same time, I realized that I can chuck the bathwater out, but I don't have to I don't have to hurt a living thing. Like all you
Yeah.
like there's a movie called, I think it's a movie called For Your Consideration from Christopher Guest, who does like Waiting for Guffman and Best in Show. Anyway, there's a line in the movie that says, you know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because all you get is a wet, critically injured baby. And it's true, you know, like I found that to be
Yeah.
true. It's like I didn't want to kind of extend my trauma and my hurt. And the Kansas 25 project, I think even now is a little bit not just a celebration of that longevity, but even for my own personal sense, going, oh wow, like I've gone through all of this stuff that's very well documented and very much witnessed. A lot of people have been along on the ride with me. I'm like, I'm still
Yeah.
here. Like I've been able to rescue the most meaningful parts of my faith. And despite what its fashion has been over the years and hurts, my own mistakes, or a variety of other things, it stood to be a good friend of mine. It's very much embedded in my DNA to be engaged in my faith and my spiritual experience. Even though that might not make sense to others, or it might not
Yeah.
look as fashionable in the ways that they imagine it, that authenticity of faith that I have sought and labored for has been an effort that I'm very grateful, because it hasn't ever abandoned me in that sense, and even when I've
Mhm.
abandoned it. So it's a little bit one of those weird mysteries that even in my consternation about faith and church and community on my darkest days, where I'm like, I hate that I have to say that my faith has been meaningful and transformative in my life.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, because it has. And I feel the dishonor, not only to the faith, but to myself, to not give that the credit that it's due, because it literally has changed my life in the most positive and affirming way, even in its complexity and frustration. So, and Kansas 25 strangely is a representation of that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very rare as an artist that, you know, we get to do the kind of work that actually really does manifest a lot of our life experience in the one little package. It's like, wow, it's all right there. It's hard to believe. I can say
Yeah.
so much about it.
Yeah. I could definitely I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. As I've spent time in church as a volunteer, creating programs, as a graphic artist in the creative arts and designing pamphlets and all the superfluous stuff, right? And so even when I like was going into a professional like job and having to revisit my portfolio of graphic design stuff and kind of cringing at some of the work because it was done for a church and
Right.
out of the place I
You judge your
was like
work.
I judged my work, or I
Yeah.
when I walked away from church for a season, it was like looking back at some of the stuff I did in a totally different mindset and perspective of faith and Christianity, and like, why was I doing this? Why did I create this? Why was I giving my time and service as a volunteer in the church, and kind of just cringing at it? But I think it's wonderful what you said. It's like you have to almost honor that part of yourself as well, and you have to honor your past self and say like and look at all the transformation, how far you've come, how far you've grown, and to ignore your past is not super honoring to yourself, and it's really and it's harder to love yourself and give yourself that compassion if you're not looking back and reflecting on it.
Yeah, it is a thing. I tend to like not go back and listen to my records. I hate it. It makes me so
Mhm.
uncomfortable. Strangely enough, when I re-recorded this record, I made it a mission, probably more. I made it a mission to not listen to the original recording. I let
Yeah,
Steve do that. I just wanted to kind of approach these clean. But what what I appreciated about what you just said is like there's actually it's looking back on the things that we have done and when we have like a material thing to kind of give evidence for that is frustrate or to not necessarily to edit our work, but to
yeah,
do a couple of things and looking at the history of what we've done. It takes a bit of courage to be able to do that because you're going to see things if you've evolved in any way whatsoever, right? You're going to grow
yeah,
or change, or there are a variety of different ways in which we're not going to repeat the same thing in the same way again. And we're going to judge it, and we're going, but it's also like teaches us to be graceful to ourselves. Like if you can figure out a way to be graceful to yourself, like to me, I think that's the key to being graceful to others as well. But I don't know that some of those things that I'm talking about in my own life that I would have had, I would have learned had I not been participating in music. Like had I not been
mhm,
in the creative world that has been, it's just not helpful to judge our work. It's helpful to be critical of our work and to try and be, produce better. But it's like we would never go back and look at our drawings when we're 5 years old and say, stupid kid doesn't know how to draw, can't color inside the lines. I mean, it's when you say it that way, right?
yeah,
It's incredibly harsh. And instead of just, like all of us, like some of us have moms, right, who've kept the baby scrapbook where we've got our little hands stuck in the
mhm,
plaster or little curls of hair. And for whatever reason, even looking at that, going, oh, I was a baby once. I didn't know things and somebody took care of me. Like
yeah,
the variety of all those things, or even be able to see between then and now going, look how far I've come. Like this wasn't easy to get what I have. Like that was a hard victory one. If we don't have a little bit of the courage to do that, we miss out on appreciating, not just where we are today, but appreciating the work that sometimes flies by us in the moment. So yeah, it can be terrifying, right? To look at all
yeah,
that work and go, oh my gosh, like that was so 80s or 90s, or
mhm, yeah,
I've learned so much since then, and thinking, oh, because I didn't know it then that it wasn't a quality work or a meaningful work that came out of you. It still came out of you. You still took the time to do it. And
yeah,
that's worth honoring because you wouldn't be who you are today if it weren't for that work.
right, yeah. And then to help round out the conversation, what is one thing if you can hop in a DeLorean and travel back in time to any period in your life and tell yourself something about yourself in the future? What would that be, or an advice, or
Oh,
a mantra, or anything?
yeah, when it comes to the space-time continuum and time travel, I tend to go, "Don't mess with it." Like, I am so
Hmm.
in joy of the human being I am today. Like, I know it's being super nerdy, but I'm like, if you travel
Yeah,
back in time and cross the wires, right, it'll change everything, and all of a sudden your,
yeah,
parents are different. So you know, I think I know that there was a part of me definitely growing up that longed for comfort and didn't get it in a variety of places that I sought it. But if there was anything that I was missing, it was probably just hearing there is comfort, or there will be comfort.
Mm,
Because I was doing a lot of things. Like, I look back in my life, and I think there were a lot of things that I did. I started writing because I sought comfort. I would sit out and lay on my back and stare at the stars and contemplate whether, be mad some days that there was no God, and contemplate maybe there might be, or hoping that there was. All of these things that I did in looking for the comfort in my early life, it felt so desperate for a very, very long time, until, well into my 20s, until I just started to kind of see. And I think that's why I responded so well to my faith, was because finally there was something that I felt like I could participate with, and that, the kind of comfort or joy and love and wholeness and well-being that I saw wasn't just a labor I was doing on my own. But
mm,
somehow or other, I got through it, and I sought that, and I don't know where it came from, but I would just have been, yeah, I wish I'm glad that she survived it, but it would have been nice to her to hear there is comfort. And
yeah,
it's there, and it not just coming,
mm,
but it is there. And I think all of those things are true, but to have heard that out loud from a place with clarity and with connection in a way that I could hold on to for those times that wasn't obvious to me, would have made some of those years a lot less traumatic, I think. And I would have caused a lot less damage to myself, or allowed others to damage me as well along the way. But yeah, I think that's what I would say today.
nice. And then last question is, what is one thing you want people to kind of know about you, your work, or anything you just want to say? It can be anything.
Well, if I think I speak a lot, so I don't think
Yeah,
that, like, there's any mystery about what I do, but there are a lot of ways to participate in what I'm doing. The easiest way to tell people, if you're intrigued by any of this stuff and these conversations, you can connect through jenniferknapp.com. I have everywhere, from email lists if you're just a concert goer, and to a Patreon account, which is linked through that, where I do all kinds of interactive stuff, in a variety of different ways. So that's a fun little community. It's not big. I'm very accessible inside of Patreon. And it's just fun. I got to know a lot of people through that space, and we socialize together, and not, it's more of a social space than it is for me, like some outcome of creative space, which has been
right.
really helpful. And interestingly enough, too, ways for other people to connect inside of that for conversations like this, if it's appealing. So
Mm,
yeah, jenniferknapp.com will tell you all you need to know, and will give
sweet.
you all the avenues to being able to connect more.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure having this conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, Nick. I really did enjoy the conversation as well.
Sweet.